A daughter once fired her own father from the empire he created. This is the true story of a modern Gilded Age heiress who orchestrated a stunning boardroom coup, a tale where immense wealth collides with deep family bonds. By the end, you will understand the true price of power in a world of legacy and ambition. What drives a child to make such an ultimate corporate move against a parent? And was the victory worth the devastating cost? Or where does the line fall between family loyalty and professional duty? The answers reveal a shocking drama of betrayal and succession. What would you be willing to sacrifice for control of your own destiny? Her name was Christina, a woman born not just into wealth, but into a legacy. From her earliest days, she understood that the family name was synonymous with a global business empire. Her playgrounds were corporate offices, and her bedtime stories were tales of mergers and acquisitions. This was a world of gilded expectations, where her future was not a path to be chosen, but a throne to be inherited. She was the undisputed heir apparent, groomed for leadership with an intensity that shaped her entire being. Her education was a carefully curated map to power, from exclusive Swiss boarding schools to the hallowed halls of an Ivy League business school. Every step was designed to forge a perfect successor, one who could blend old-world prestige with modern corporate strategy. After graduation, she did not simply receive a job. She began a carefully orchestrated ascent through the company ranks. She started in mid-level management roles, learning the business from the ground up, or at least from a perspective carefully managed by her father's inner circle. She proved to be sharp, capable, and fiercely ambitious, earning a reputation for her meticulous work ethic and a surprising grasp of operational details that many heirs might overlook. To the public, she cultivated an image of poised modernity. She was the fresh face of a traditional brand, championing philanthropy and innovation in equal measure. She gave interviews about empowering the next generation of female leaders, all while operating firmly within the shadow of the empire's patriarch. This was the persona the world saw, the dutiful daughter being seamlessly woven into the fabric of the family dynasty. But behind the polished facade, a quiet storm was gathering. How does one prepare to inherit absolute power when the current ruler shows no sign of ever relinquishing it? The man she would one day challenge was a legend in his own right. He had not inherited an empire. He had built it with his own two hands, starting from a single, struggling factory. His name was Alexander, and his story was the stuff of corporate folklore. A relentless rise from humble beginnings to a fortune measured in billions. He was the classic patriarch, a self-made titan who saw his company not merely as a business, but as a physical extension of his own will and identity. His management style was famously autocratic, a reflection of the era in which he had triumphed. He knew every cog in the machine because he had personally designed most of them. He demanded absolute loyalty, and his word was quite simply law. To the outside world, he was a visionary, a tough but brilliant industrialist who commanded respect and a little bit of fear. He cultivated an image of unwavering strength, a man who had weathered economic storms and outmaneuvered ruthless competitors. This public persona was one of a benevolent but firm ruler, the steady hand guiding his vast creation. Within the family, his role was just as absolute. He was not just a father, he was the architect of their world. For Christina, this created a complex duality. Personally, he could be doting and proud, showering her with the privileges their wealth afforded. He saw in her his own intelligence and drive, and he took immense pride in her accomplishments, viewing them as a validation of his legacy. He was preparing her, he believed, to continue his work. Yet professionally, the relationship was entirely different. Inside the boardroom, she was never just his daughter. She was his subordinate. He was the master, and she was the apprentice, a dynamic he never truly set aside. He would praise her ideas in private, but often dismiss them in executive meetings, a subtle reminder of where the ultimate authority resided. He believed he was teaching her resilience, hardening her for the immense responsibilities to come. But from her perspective, each dismissal felt like a denial of her own capabilities, a signal that in his eyes, she would always be the child learning a lesson, never the equal ready to lead. This created a quiet, simmering tension beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect partnership. How do you prove yourself to a man who sees your entire world as his own creation? The very foundation of their relationship was about to be tested, not by an outside force, but by the ambitions he himself had instilled in her. The empire Alexander built was a sprawling global conglomerate known as Sterling Holdings. It was not a single company, but a vast network of interlocking businesses, with its core fortune rooted in industrial manufacturing. This was the world of heavy machinery, precision engineering, and complex logistics, a sector far removed from the glamour of tech or fashion, but one that formed the literal backbone of global commerce. Sterling factories on 4 continents produced the essential components that kept other industries running, from automotive parts to aerospace systems. Its financial standing was monumental, with annual revenues soaring into the tens of billions of dollars, a figure that placed it firmly among the world's most powerful private enterprises. The company employed hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, making its operational health a matter of national interest for several countries. But for the family, Sterling was infinitely more than a business. It was the physical manifestation of Alexander's life's work, his greatest creation and his only true legacy. He had named it Sterling not just for the quality he demanded, but as a statement of unwavering value and permanence. Every asset, every subsidiary, every corporate trophy was a brick in this monument to his own genius. The company's logo was etched onto the family crest. Its headquarters was the closest thing they had to an ancestral home, and its boardroom was their throne room. Control of Sterling was not merely about wealth or power. It was about controlling the family's very soul. This was the prize Christina had been raised to covet and protect, the symbol she would one day have to seize from the man who crafted it. The first cracks appeared not as dramatic breaks, but as hairline fractures in their professional partnership. Christina, steeped in modern business theory, began to advocate for a significant digital transformation of Sterling's core operations. She saw a future where data analytics streamlined their supply chain and artificial intelligence optimized their manufacturing lines. To her, this was an essential evolution to keep the empire competitive in a new century. To Alexander, it was an insult to the very hands-on mechanical genius that had built the company. He would listen to her proposals in strategy meetings, his expression growing stony. "Your algorithms cannot feel the heat of a forge," he would tell her, his voice low and firm. "They cannot hear the hum of a perfectly calibrated machine. This is not a tech startup. This is an industrial powerhouse." Their clashes over personnel were even more personal. Christina pushed for promoting younger, diverse executives from within, managers who demonstrated innovative thinking. Alexander remained fiercely loyal to his old guard, the seasoned veterans who had been with him since the early days. He saw her suggestions as a betrayal of that loyalty, a desire to replace trusted companions with untested strangers. A particularly tense moment erupted over the future of a struggling division. Christina presented a detailed plan for a strategic pivot, arguing it could capture a new, lucrative market. Alexander dismissed it outright, insisting the division needed stronger leadership, not a new direction. The argument spilled out of the boardroom and into the private family dinner that evening. The table, once a sanctuary, became an extension of the office war zone. The conversation would start calmly, then quickly devolve into a rehashing of the day's conflict, with Alexander's paternal tone shifting into a CEO's uncompromising decree. Christina felt her expertise was being systematically invalidated, not on its merits, but because it challenged his legacy. He, in turn, felt she was rushing to dismantle his life's work without understanding its foundational strength. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken resentments. Every business discussion was now layered with a personal subtext, a silent battle over whose vision would define the future of the Sterling name. How long can a foundation bear the weight of such a fundamental rift before the entire structure begins to shudder? The battle for Sterling Holdings would not be won with shouting matches over the dinner table. It would be decided in the cold, procedural language of corporate governance, a realm where power is measured in votes and board seats. The structure Alexander had put in place was a fortress designed to protect his control. The company had two classes of stock, a common arrangement in family-dominated empires. There was the Class A stock, held by public shareholders and some institutional investors, which carried a single vote per share. Then there was the powerful Class B stock, super voting shares that carried 10 votes each. The family trust, controlled by Alexander, held the overwhelming majority of these super voting shares. This structure meant that while the public owned a large portion of the company's economic value, Alexander held an iron grip on its strategic direction. He could not be outvoted by the common shareholders. His will was the company's command. The board of directors was the other key pillar of his power. It was composed of 14 members, a mix of long-serving Sterling executives and hand-picked external advisors, all loyalists who had served at his pleasure for years. They were the guardians of his legacy, a human wall built to preserve his vision. For Christina to have any chance, she would need to breach this wall. She began a quiet, meticulous campaign, one that played out in private lunches and discreet phone calls rather than in boardroom showdowns. She identified the board members who were growing restless, the ones who privately worried that Alexander's resistance to change was putting the entire empire at risk. She focused on the younger independent directors, those with backgrounds in technology and global finance, who understood the urgency of her modernization plans. To them, she was not a rebellious daughter. She was the company's best hope for a future. Simultaneously, she reached out to the major institutional shareholders, the pension funds and asset managers who held large blocks of the class of stock. They had no voting power to overthrow Alexander, but they had immense influence and a powerful voice. They were increasingly concerned about Sterling's stagnant growth and its failure to adapt to a digital economy. Christina became their champion, privately sharing her detailed strategic blueprints and convincing them that she was the agent of change they desperately wanted to see. She was building a coalition, not through force, but through persuasion, aligning the ambitions of powerful outsiders with her own inherited destiny. The fortress walls were still standing, but a silent, determined force was now methodically probing for weaknesses. How do you unseat a king when his entire court is sworn to his service? You find the few who question his reign and promise them a better kingdom. The breaking point arrived not with a public explosion, but in the sterile quiet of a quarterly earnings call. For months, Christina had been privately negotiating a landmark joint venture with a pioneering European tech firm, a deal that would finally inject Sterling with the cutting-edge artificial intelligence it desperately needed. She had worked in secret, building trust and aligning terms, presenting it to her father only when the framework was solid. He had seemed ambivalent, neither endorsing nor explicitly forbidding her to proceed. Then, on the call, with analysts and major investors listening, a question about Sterling's digital strategy came directly to Alexander. Instead of deferring to his daughter, the designated leader of this new initiative, he chuckled. That sound, condescending and dismissive, echoed through the phone lines. He dismissed the entire field of AI integration as a passing fad for Silicon Valley dreamers, reaffirming his faith in what he called real engineering, the kind you could see and touch. He publicly shredded the very partnership Christina had nearly sealed, calling it a distraction from their core strengths. In that moment, she was not his heir or a senior executive. She was a child being humiliated for bringing a silly fantasy to the adults' table. The disrespect was professional, but the wound was deeply personal. It was the ultimate proof that he would never see her as an equal, that her vision would always be subordinate to his nostalgia. That single, cavalier chuckle on a public stage was the final catalyst. It transformed her simmering frustration into a cold, unwavering resolve. The time for persuasion was over. The boardroom coup was no longer an option. It was a necessity. The public humiliation on that earnings call was the final piece of her plan snapping into place. Christina now understood that her father's reign was no longer just a matter of differing opinions. It was an active threat to the company's survival. Her response would not be an emotional outburst, but a corporate campaign executed with the precision of a military operation. She retreated into absolute secrecy, knowing that a single leak to her father or his loyalists would spell immediate and total defeat. Her first, most critical move was to engage a small, elite law firm specializing in corporate governance and high-stakes succession battles. These lawyers were not just advisors. They were architects of a hostile takeover from within. In a secure, windowless conference room, they pored over the company's bylaws and the family trust documents, searching for the single clause, the one procedural loophole that could be leveraged to force a change in leadership. They determined that the board of directors itself held the ultimate power. If a majority of its 14 members voted to remove Alexander as chairman and chief executive officer, the super voting shares in his control would be rendered powerless for that specific decision. The board was the lock, and Christina needed to find 7 keys. Her campaign to win those votes was a masterclass in corporate diplomacy. She identified the 3 board members she believed were most sympathetic, the ones who had privately expressed concerns about the company's direction. She met them separately in discreet locations far from the corporate headquarters. Over quiet dinners and in private clubs, she laid out her comprehensive plan for Sterling's future, a detailed blueprint that addressed every weakness and capitalized on every missed opportunity. She presented herself not as a usurping daughter, but as the only executive with a viable strategy to save the empire her father had built. She spoke their language, the language of shareholder value, market relevance, and long-term growth. She assured them this was not about personal ambition, but about professional necessity. Simultaneously, she worked on the major institutional investors, leveraging their growing impatience. She made it clear that their vocal support for a leadership change would apply immense pressure on the more cautious board members. The timing of the move was everything. Her legal team advised waiting for the next scheduled board meeting, a routine gathering where Alexander would be lulled into a sense of security. A special meeting called to discuss his removal would have been a glaring alarm bell. The regular quarterly meeting was the perfect Trojan horse. Every detail was choreographed. The legal documents were drafted and ready. The supportive board members were prepped on exactly what to say and when to say it. The order of the meeting's agenda was studied to identify the perfect moment to introduce the motion for a vote. Christina even planned her own physical positioning in the room, choosing a seat that conveyed authority rather than subordination. The stage was set for a confrontation that would redefine the meaning of family legacy. What happens when the carefully groomed heir decides the king must fall? The day of the quarterly board meeting dawned with a deceptive calm. Alexander arrived at the Sterling headquarters, as he always did, confident and completely unaware of the carefully laid trap waiting for him in the 14th floor boardroom. The room itself was a temple to his success, all polished mahogany and a massive table carved from a single ancient oak, a physical symbol of the unshakable empire he had built. He took his customary seat at the head of the table, the throne he had occupied for decades. Christina sat a few chairs down, her posture perfectly composed, a file of documents resting neatly before her. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a static charge that the routine reports on quarterly revenues could not dissipate. One by one, the 14 board members filed in, their greetings polite but subdued. The meeting began normally, with financial reviews and operational updates. Alexander led the discussion with his usual firm authority, but a few of the directors seemed distracted, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Christina. The pivotal moment came when the agenda moved to new business. It was then that one of the younger, independent directors, a woman named Evelyn Reed, cleared her throat. She did not look at Alexander. Instead, she addressed the room, her voice steady but firm. She spoke not of personal grievances, but of cold, hard facts. She outlined the company's declining market share, its failure to keep pace with technological innovation, and the growing unrest among their most important investors. She then presented a formal resolution, a motion to immediately remove Alexander Sterling from his positions as chairman and chief executive officer, citing a necessary strategic pivot for the long-term health of the corporation. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sharp intake of Alexander's breath. He stared first at Evelyn, then at his daughter. The betrayal in his eyes was a physical force in the room. He slowly rose from his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and rising fury. "This is an outrage," he began, his voice trembling with a rage no one in that room had ever witnessed. "This is my company. I built it from nothing. Every brick, every patent, every dollar of profit exists because of me." He turned his gaze fully on Christina. "And you," he said, the words dripping with contempt, "you would orchestrate this mutiny. You would tear down everything I have given you." Christina met his stare, her own expression unreadable. "This is not a mutiny, Father," she replied, her voice eerily calm. "This is a rescue mission. Your methods are from a different century. Your refusal to adapt is strangling this company. We are not tearing down your legacy. We are saving it from your own stubbornness." The debate that followed was brutal and swift. Alexander's loyalists, the old guard, argued passionately for stability and loyalty, invoking decades of shared struggle and success. But the voices of change were louder and better prepared. They spoke of fiduciary duty, of the obligation to all shareholders, not just to one man's pride. They referenced the humiliating earnings call and the failed joint venture as proof of Alexander's disconnect from the modern market. When the time for the vote arrived, the board secretary called the roll. One by one, the votes were cast. Yes, yes, no, yes. The tally was recorded in stark silence. When the final vote was announced, the result was 7-6, with one abstention. Alexander Sterling was officially removed. The gavel fell not with a bang, but with a soft, definitive tap. In that moment, the patriarch was dethroned. The empire had a new ruler. He stood there for a long moment, a king stripped of his crown in the very room he had designed to showcase his power. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving his daughter sitting in the silence of her victory. The cost of that power was now written plainly on her face. The news exploded across financial networks like a silent bomb. Sterling Holdings, a bastion of old-world corporate stability, was now the center of the most shocking business story in a generation. The official press release was a masterpiece of sterile corporate language, stating only that Alexander Sterling had stepped down and that his daughter, Christina, was now the chair and chief executive officer. It offered thanks for his decades of service and expressed confidence in the company's new direction. But nobody was fooled. The carefully worded statement could not conceal the brutal reality of a boardroom coup. Within minutes, the phones in newsrooms and trading floors began ringing off the hook. The media frenzy was instantaneous and insatiable. Business channels interrupted their scheduled programming, their screens splashed with dramatic graphics asking, "Who really runs Sterling?" Pundits and analysts scrambled to dissect the few known facts, weaving narratives of betrayal and ambition that captivated a global audience. The story transcended the business section, becoming front-page news everywhere. A modern-day Shakespearean drama played out with billions of dollars at stake. The stock market's reaction was a roller coaster of pure panic and speculative frenzy. Trading in sterling's class, a shares was temporarily halted due to extreme volatility. When it resumed, the stock first plummeted as investors recoiled at the sudden, violent leadership change and the uncertainty it represented. Then, just as quickly, it began a sharp and unexpected recovery. This rebound was fueled by leaked details of Christina's modernization plan. Major institutional investors who had been privately briefed saw not chaos, but the long-awaited catalyst for change. They started buying aggressively, betting that her vision would unlock value that her father's stubbornness had suppressed. The stock's wild swing was a direct reflection of the battle between fear of the unknown and hope for a more profitable future. The family's response, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. There was no joint statement, no photograph of a united front. Alexander's camp remained utterly silent, a void of information that seemed to scream of his fury and humiliation. A brief quote was attributed to a family spokesperson, saying only that the Sterling family was dealing with a private matter and requested understanding during this difficult time. It was a diplomatic nothingness that confirmed the deep personal schism. Industry insiders reacted with a mixture of disbelief and grim acknowledgement. Some of the old guard fellow Titans who had built their own empires alongside Alexander expressed private horror, seeing it as the ultimate act of filial ingratitude. How could she do this to the man who gave her everything? They whispered at private clubs, but a younger generation of executives and Texios saw it differently. They viewed Christina not as a traitor, but as a revolutionary. She had done what many of them only dreamed of, forcing a sclerotic giant to finally face the future. For the general public, the story was a captivating morality play. Was Christina a cold, power-hungry heiress who had betrayed her own father? Or was she a courageous modernizer who had made the painful but necessary choice to save her family's legacy from itself? The court of public opinion was sharply divided, and everyone had a take. In the span of a single day, a corporate succession had become a global spectacle, proving that the most explosive dramas are not written by screenwriters, but in the quiet, ruthless halls of power. Alexander's silence was not a quiet surrender, but a gathering storm. The world waited for his reaction, and when it finally came, it was not through a formal press conference, but in a series of searing, deeply personal interviews. He sat before journalists, a man visibly diminished, his pride replaced by a raw and profound hurt. He did not speak like a former chief executive analyzing a corporate strategy. He spoke as a father whose world had been shattered. He called Christina's actions a profound and unforgivable betrayal, a knife plunged into his back by the one person he had trusted most. My life's work was not just taken from me, he told one reporter, his voice heavy with emotion. It was stolen by my own child. I gave her everything, and she repaid me with a conspiracy. He framed the boardroom coup not as a business decision, but as an act of personal treachery, a narrative that instantly resonated with a global audience. The emotional toll was etched into his face. Friends described a man retreating into isolation, cut adrift from the company that had been his identity for over half a century. He was a ship without a port, lost in a sea of bitterness and regret. The rupture was absolute, severing not just a professional partnership, but the very core of their family. He refused to take her calls, and family gatherings, once grand affairs, became impossible. The father-daughter bond, meticulously constructed over decades of shared ambition, was now a casualty of war. His response, however, was not purely emotional. The legal threats began to surface almost immediately. Through his lawyers, he launched a furious counter-assault, challenging the validity of the board's vote. He argued that the process had been riddled with procedural errors and that several directors had been misled about the true nature of the company's financial health. He filed a lawsuit against the board itself, alleging breaches of fiduciary duty and corporate waste, claiming they had destroyed shareholder value by removing its visionary founder. It was a legal Hail Mary, an attempt to fight in the courts the battle he had lost in the boardroom. For Alexander, this was no longer about regaining his throne. It was about principle, about proving that his daughter's victory was illegitimate. The legal filings became a new public battlefield, each document dripping with accusations that kept the scandal blazing in the headlines. He became a tragic, sympathetic figure for many, a king stripped of his kingdom, fighting not just for his company, but for his very legacy. But beneath the legal maneuvering and the public outrage, a simple, painful question remained. How do you rebuild a life when the very purpose of that life has been taken from you by the person you loved most? For Christina, silence was a luxury she could not afford. In the days following the coup, she stepped into the glare of the media not as a defiant conqueror, but as a reluctant surgeon. Her first major televised interview was a masterclass in controlled narrative, a carefully crafted explanation designed to reframe a personal betrayal as a corporate imperative. She sat calmly, her hands folded, and met the host's probing questions with unwavering eye contact. She never once called it a coup. She referred to it as a necessary leadership transition. She spoke of her profound love for her father, acknowledging the immense debt she and the company owed to his genius. But love, she argued, could not blind her to the hard truths of a changing world. She painted a picture of an empire at a crossroads, where sentimentality was a direct threat to its survival. My father built a magnificent ship, she said, her voice steady. But he was determined to steer it by the stars of 50 years ago, ignoring the modern radar and the storm clouds on the horizon. My duty was not to the captain, but to the ship itself, and to all the thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on its staying afloat. Her justification was built on 3 unshakable pillars, each backed by data she made accessible to a general audience. The first was technological obsolescence. She described Sterling's core manufacturing systems as being from a different era, reliant on processes that were inefficient and costly. She gave a simple, powerful example. A competitor using AI-driven logistics could reroute a supply chain around a port strike in minutes, saving millions. Sterling's manual system would take days, costing the company dearly. This was not a vague prediction, she stated. It was a reality already eating into their profit margins. The second pillar was financial inevitability. She spoke of the growing impatience of their largest investors, the pension funds and asset managers who controlled vast pools of capital. These were not enemies, she explained, They were partners who had a fiduciary duty to their own clients. They were losing confidence, and without their support, Sterling's ability to raise capital for essential upgrades would vanish. The board's vote, in her telling, was not an attack on her father, but a collective act to prevent a slow, painful corporate decline that would have cost countless jobs. The final and most poignant pillar was the legacy itself. This was her most strategic argument. She framed her actions as the ultimate act of preservation. Allowing the company to stagnate and fail would have been the true betrayal of her father's life's work, she asserted. By forcing this change, she was ensuring that the Sterling name would endure for another century, modernized and resilient, rather than becoming a relic in a corporate history book. I did not tear down his monument. I saved it from crumbling dust. The emotional core of her defense was the concept of a painful but necessary choice. She admitted the personal cost was devastating, that the rift with her father was a wound that might never fully heal. But she positioned herself as a leader who had the courage to make that sacrifice for the greater good of the company her father loved. She was not the villain of a family drama. She presented herself as the heroine of a corporate rescue mission. The question she left hanging in the air was a heavy one. When the survival of an entire world is at stake, is it more loyal to obey the king or to save the kingdom? Christina Sterling's name was suddenly on everyone's lips, but who was she, really? The media and the public scrambled to answer that question, and the answers they found created two starkly different portraits of the same woman. On one side, she was painted as the ultimate villain, a ruthless usurper who had committed the most profound act of filial betrayal. Tabloids and conservative commentators seized on the emotional core of the story, framing it as a modern-day King Lear. How could a daughter do this to the father who gave her everything? They thundered. They depicted Alexander as a tragic hero, a self-made man brought down by the very legacy he had created. In this narrative, Christina was arrogant, power-hungry, and disloyal, a symbol of a generation that valued ambition over respect and tradition. Her actions were seen as a cold, calculated power grab, devoid of any familial love or gratitude. The story resonated deeply with anyone who valued family loyalty above all else, turning her into a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of absolute power. Yet another powerful narrative was taking shape, one that cast Christina in a completely different light. For a growing number of people, particularly younger professionals and advocates for women in leadership, she was not a villain, but a heroine. Business magazines featured her on their covers with headlines like "The Leader We Need" and "The Courage to Change." They praised her as a strong, modern executive who had the guts to make an agonizingly tough choice for the greater good of the company and its employees. She was celebrated as a pragmatic visionary who put the survival of an empire ahead of her personal relationship, a leader who refused to let sentimental attachment sink a ship carrying thousands of jobs. This view framed Alexander not as a victim, but as an obstacle, a stubborn patriarch whose outdated pride was the real threat to the family legacy. The public debate became a Rorschach test for our own values. Was true strength found in unwavering loyalty to family, or in the courage to challenge it for a larger purpose? Did her gender play a role in the criticism she faced? Would a son who did the same thing be called decisive and powerful? while a daughter was labeled cold and treacherous. There were no easy answers, only a deeply divided court of public opinion where Christina Sterling was both lauded and loathed, often for the very same actions. In the end, the battle for Sterling Holdings was no longer just a corporate drama. It had become a cultural mirror. This story of a daughter dethroning her father feels like a script from a bygone era, yet it echoes with a startling modernity. We can trace its roots back to the original Gilded Age, a period defined by colossal fortunes and the families who wielded them. Then, as now, the central drama was not just about wealth, but about the raw human struggle for control within the glittering cages of immense privilege. The titans of industry, men like Alexander who built empires from scratch, were the new money of their day. They were the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, viewed with a mixture of awe and suspicion by an established aristocracy that questioned their rough manners and sudden power. Their daughters, the Gilded Age heiresses, were often trapped in a similar duality. They were raised to be ornaments of their father's success, their value measured in strategic marriages that could buy a veneer of old-world respectability for new-world cash. They were groomed for a life of luxury, but rarely for a life of leadership. Their power was indirect, exercised through influence and social maneuvering, because the boardroom was an exclusively male domain. A woman seeking direct control over the family business was almost unthinkable. She could inherit the fortune, but she was not expected to command the machine that created it. Christina's story is a direct, explosive evolution of that same generational clash. Her father, Alexander, is a classic Gilded Age patriarch in a modern suit. He built his Sterling Holdings with the same relentless, individualistic drive as the 19th century industrialists. He sees the company as his personal fiefdom, a monument to his own genius that must be preserved exactly as he designed it. His vision is one of absolute ownership, where loyalty to the founder trumps all other considerations. Christina represents the new generation of heirs, educated at the world's best schools and steeped in a global, collaborative business culture. Her conflict with her father is a perfect echo of the old money versus new money tension, but with a fascinating twist. In this case, the new money mindset, with its focus on innovation and adaptation, is embodied by the heir, while the founder clings to the very disruptive bootstraps mentality that made him rich. The most powerful parallel, however, lies in the fight for a woman's voice in a man's world. The original heiresses often had to wield their power from the drawing room, using their social connections and personal influence to shape events. Christina, armed with an MBA and a deep understanding of corporate law, did not need to work from the shadows. She fought her battle in the boardroom itself, the modern equivalent of the male inner sanctum. Yet, the criticism she faced feels hauntingly familiar. A son who had executed the same boardroom coup might have been praised as a strong, decisive leader. For a daughter, the same actions risked the age-old labels of being cold, calculating, and unfeminine. Her story asks us a difficult question. Have the battlefields for power within wealthy families truly changed? Or have the weapons simply evolved from social maneuvers to legal motions and proxy votes? The Gilded Cage is now a corporate headquarters, but the struggle for the key remains a deeply human and often heartbreaking drama. The legal battle for Sterling Holdings transformed the boardroom drama into a sprawling, high-stakes war fought in courthouses instead of corporate headquarters. Alexander's lawsuit against the board was only the opening salvo. He alleged they had violated their fiduciary duty by acting in bad faith, arguing that their primary motivation was not the company's welfare, but a blind allegiance to his daughter's reckless ambition. His legal team meticulously dissected the meeting's procedures, searching for any minor technical misstep, any failure to provide proper notice that could invalidate the entire vote. They claimed the board had been misled by cherry-picked data and a distorted portrayal of the company's financial health. This was not a dry corporate dispute. It was a deeply personal crusade framed in the sterile language of legal briefs, with Alexander fighting to prove his ouster was not just a mistake, but an illegal act. Simultaneously, a different kind of legal threat emerged from the financial markets. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of a group of Class A shareholders. Their argument was clever and damaging. They did not sue Christina or the new board directly. Instead, they sued Alexander and the old board for the period before the coup. Their claim was that his stubborn refusal to modernize and his public dismissal of vital strategies constituted a gross breach of his own fiduciary duties, actively destroying the value of their shares long before his daughter moved against him. This created a bizarre legal triangle. You had Alexander suing the new board for removing him, while shareholders were suing Alexander for the very incompetence that led to his removal. The legal system was now tasked with untangling a single question from two opposing angles. Who was truly responsible for the fluctuation in Sterling's stock price? The father who resisted change, or the daughter who forced it? The discovery process became a nightmare of corporate espionage and family secrets laid bare. Lawyers for all sides demanded access to thousands of internal emails, private strategy memos, and even the minutes of family trust meetings. Every harsh word exchanged between father and daughter, every skeptical comment from a board member, every worried analysis from a financial advisor was now potential evidence. The airing of the family's dirty laundry was no longer a metaphor. It was a formal legal procedure, with confidential documents being stamped as exhibits and entered into the public court record. For months, the future of the entire empire hung in a precarious balance, its direction paralyzed by legal maneuvers. Major strategic decisions, the very kind Christina had fought to implement, were put on hold, as any significant move could be used against her in court. The rescue mission was now stuck in a quagmire of its own making, and the cost of victory was mounting every single day. Inside Sterling Holdings, the news landed like a seismic shockwave. For the hundreds of thousands of employees worldwide, this was not a distant corporate drama. It was a deeply personal earthquake. The sudden removal of Alexander Sterling, the only leader most of them had ever known, created an atmosphere of profound uncertainty and fear. How could the man whose portrait hung in every lobby, whose name was on the building, simply be gone overnight? The initial reaction across the company was a stunned silence, quickly followed by a torrent of anxious whispers and frantic speculation. Rumors swirled through every department and factory floor. Was the company in financial trouble they had not been told about? Would there be mass layoffs as the new CEO cleaned house? For middle managers, the anxiety was especially acute. They had built their careers navigating the old regime's clear, if rigid, hierarchy. Now, the entire map had been torn up, and they had no idea what the new territory would look like, or if they would even have a place in it. The internal communications department scrambled to control the narrative. An all-staff email from Christina went out within hours of the public announcement. It was carefully worded, respectful of the past, but firmly focused on the future. She praised her father's monumental contributions, but she immediately pivoted to the urgent need for stability and a unified path forward. She promised no immediate, sweeping changes to the core workforce, a crucial message designed to prevent panic. Yet, words on a screen could only do so much to calm a terrified organization. The real work of reassurance had to be more personal, more tangible. Christina knew she had to become a visible, steadying presence. She embarked on a whirlwind listening tour, visiting key corporate offices and manufacturing plants. She did not hide in executive suites. She walked the factory floors, her security detail trailing at a discreet distance. She stood in front of groups of nervous engineers and line workers, not with a polished PowerPoint presentation, but with a microphone and a willingness to answer difficult questions directly. One assembly line supervisor, a man who had been with Sterling for 30 years, voiced the fear on everyone's mind. He asked her, point blank, if their plant was going to be shut down and the jobs sent overseas. Christina did not offer empty promises. She looked him in the eye and explained the real competitive pressures they faced. She then laid out her specific plan to retool their facility with new automation, not to replace them, but to make their work more efficient and secure their plant's future against cheaper foreign competition. It was a message of investment, not abandonment. For the middle management layer, she held intimate roundtable discussions. She acknowledged their difficult position, caught between executing a new vision and managing teams unsettled by the change. She empowered them by sharing key parts of her strategic blueprint, making them partners in the transition rather than mere subordinates waiting for orders. She announced new training initiatives focused on digital skills, signaling that she was investing in their growth, not plotting their replacement. These efforts were a deliberate campaign to transform fear into cautious optimism. It was a slow, painful process. The shadow of her father and the manner of his departure would loom for a long time, but slowly, a new message began to seep into the company's culture. The message was not just about survival, but about revival. The new captain was telling the crew that the ship was not sinking. It was being refitted for a faster, more dangerous ocean, and she needed every one of them to help steer it. Would this be enough to unite a fractured empire? Or were the cracks in the foundation simply too deep to repair? Her first 100 days as chief executive officer were a masterclass in decisive action. Christina moved with a speed that stunned industry observers, launching a multi-pronged strategy designed to prove she was not merely a caretaker, but a true visionary. Her first and most public move was the immediate revival of the European tech joint venture her father had so publicly mocked. She personally flew to Berlin to sign the final agreement, a symbolic gesture that was captured by photographers and broadcast across financial news networks. This was not just a business deal, it was a statement. The age of Sterling was over. The age of innovation had begun. The deal injected Sterling's manufacturing heart with a powerful dose of artificial intelligence, promising to optimize supply chains and predictive maintenance in ways that would save hundreds of millions within the first few years. Simultaneously, she announced a sweeping internal restructuring. She dismantled the old, siloed divisions that reported through layers of her father's loyalists, creating instead a flatter, more agile organizational chart built around interdisciplinary teams. This was a direct assault on the corporate bureaucracy that had stifled new ideas for decades. To lead these new teams, she made a series of bold external hires, poaching top talent from leading tech firms and logistics giants. She brought in a new chief technology officer, a woman known for her work in digital transformation, and gave her a mandate to overhaul every aspect of the company's operations. These new faces in the executive suite sent a clear message to the entire industry. Sterling was no longer an insular family fiefdom. It was open for business with the best minds in the world. Publicly, she launched the Sterling Forward Initiative, a high-profile campaign that pledged to make the entire company carbon neutral within a decade. This was both a moral and a strategic calculation. It appealed to a new generation of environmentally conscious consumers and investors, while also forcing a necessary and long-delayed modernization of their energy-intensive factories. She tied executive bonuses directly to sustainability targets, ensuring the entire C-suite was aligned with this new mission. Every decision was a calculated step to distance her reign from her father's. Where he had valued loyalty above all, she prized competence and innovation. Where he had looked inward, she aggressively looked outward. She was systematically rewriting the corporate DNA, proving to every skeptic, inside and out, that her leadership was not an act of destruction, but one of necessary and profound rebirth. The question was no longer about her capability, but about the ultimate cost of such a rapid and ruthless transformation. The shockwaves from the boardroom did not stop at the corporate headquarters. They rippled through the very heart of the Sterling family, turning holiday dinners into battlefields and phone calls into declarations of war. While the business world debated strategy, the family was engulfed in a painful, personal civil war, with every member forced to choose a side. Alexander's siblings, his own brothers and sisters who had watched him build the empire, were among his most vocal defenders. They saw Christina's actions as an unforgivable violation of the natural order, a betrayal of the patriarch who had provided them all with unimaginable wealth and status. They closed ranks around their humiliated brother, offering him their homes as refuges and their voices as weapons in the media, publicly condemning Christina's power grab as a disgrace to the family name. Conversely, a few of the younger cousins, those who had also felt stifled by Alexander's old world control, secretly cheered for Christina. They saw her not as a traitor, but as a liberator who had broken the chains of unquestioning obedience, hoping her victory might one day open doors for their own ambitions within the modernized company. The most agonizing position was that of Christina's mother, Eleanor. She was caught in an impossible crossfire, torn between her loyalty to her husband of 40 years and her love for her only child. Friends described her as utterly devastated, a peacemaker with no peace to offer. She reportedly pleaded with Alexander for forgiveness and understanding, and with Christina for some form of compromise, but both sides were too entrenched in their own sense of righteousness. She ultimately retreated from the public eye entirely. Her silence a louder testament to the family's fracture than any angry interview could ever be. The schism was not merely emotional, it was financial and legal. Family trusts were scrutinized, with lawyers for each side examining the fine print for any leverage. Long-planned inheritances were suddenly in question, used as both carrots and sticks to punish disloyalty and reward allegiance. For a family whose identity was so deeply entwined with its wealth, this financial maneuvering made the personal rift feel terrifyingly permanent. The question hanging over the entire saga was simple and brutal. Can a family, once its trust has been shattered over the conference table, ever truly piece itself back together again? Or does the gilded frame simply hold a collection of separate, broken pieces forever? The numbers, however, tell their own ruthless story. In the 2 quarters immediately following the coup, Sterling Holdings' financial reports became the ultimate scorecard in this family war. The initial market panic had subsided, replaced by the cold, hard metrics of revenue and profit. The first quarterly report under Christina's sole command revealed a complex picture. Overall revenue had dipped by 3%, a figure that her father's loyalists seized upon as proof of her incompetence. They pointed to the disruption caused by her rapid restructuring, the costs of the new technology initiatives, and the temporary paralysis from the ongoing legal battles. To them, the numbers were a clear indictment, but a deeper look into the financial statements told a more nuanced tale. While legacy divisions tied to old manufacturing processes showed declining sales, the new units she had created around digital services and sustainable technology were already showing explosive growth, their revenue increasing by over 40%. It was a classic case of a company in the painful throes of a pivot, sacrificing short-term stability for long-term potential. The stock market, that great barometer of future expectation, seemed to believe in that potential. After its initial wild swings, Sterling's share price began a slow, steady climb, stabilizing at a level 15% higher than it was in the final days of her father's reign. Market analysts published notes praising the strategic clarity and the decisive break from the past. One influential report from a major investment bank put it bluntly: the company is no longer navigating by looking in the rearview mirror. The short-term pain is the necessary cost of avoiding long-term irrelevance. The financial fallout was a split screen. On one side, you could see the undeniable costs of the upheaval, the millions spent on legal fees and severance packages for ousted executives. On the other, you could see the first green shoots of a recovery, with new investor confidence and a stock price that was betting on Christina's vision, not mourning her father's departure. The bottom line was becoming a Rorschach test, where you saw either a company bleeding from self-inflicted wounds or a patient finally undergoing the surgery it needed to survive. Beneath the headlines and the legal filings, a quieter, more devastating war was being waged inside the hearts of the 2 central figures. For Christina, victory was a crown of thorns. The exhilaration of finally seizing control was perpetually shadowed by a profound and nagging guilt. In the dead of night, the boardroom applause would fade, replaced by the echoing silence of her father's absence. She had achieved the power she was groomed for, but the cost was the very relationship that had defined her life. Every strategic win felt like a personal loss. Was she the strong leader the company needed? Or was she the ungrateful daughter her family accused her of being? This internal conflict became her constant companion, a psychological tax on every decision she made. Her ambition, once a source of pride, now felt like a monstrous force that had consumed her humanity. Yet, intertwined with that guilt was a fierce, undeniable sense of empowerment. For the first time, her ideas were not being filtered through her father's skepticism. Her vision was becoming reality without compromise. This was a potent and addictive feeling, the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. She was no longer living in a shadow. She was casting her own, and the sheer scope of her authority was both terrifying and liberating. Across the chasm, her father Alexander was adrift in a sea of grief and rage. His identity had been so completely fused with his role as the creator and commander of Sterling that losing it was akin to a spiritual amputation. Who was he without his title, without the daily demands of the empire? He was not just a retired executive. He was a dethroned king, and the palace guards were now following new orders. The loss of power was one thing, but the betrayal of legacy was another. He had spent decades building something to pass down to his daughter, a gift of unimaginable scale. In his mind, she had not just rejected the gift, she had set fire to the workshop where it was made. His life's work felt invalidated, his paternal guidance scorned. The psychological toll was immense, leading him through cycles of bitter anger and deep depression. Friends worried he was becoming a ghost of his former self, a man whose entire reason for being had been stripped away in a single boardroom vote. This human dimension transforms the saga from a corporate case study into a timeless tragedy. It forces us to ask where the line falls between healthy ambition and destructive obsession. Can the pursuit of a legacy ever justify the shattering of the family that legacy was meant to serve? The true cost of this power was not measured in dollars, but in the silent, solitary moments of regret and resentment that now defined both of their lives. The battle for public opinion became a second front in the Sterling War, fought not in boardrooms, but in headlines and social media feeds. On one side, Alexander's camp launched a campaign centered on raw human emotion. His team, led by a veteran crisis communications firm, positioned him as the heartbroken patriarch, a living symbol of tradition and loyalty betrayed. They orchestrated a series of carefully curated interviews in soft-lit settings, where he spoke not of stock prices, but of shattered trust. A particularly powerful image showed him alone in his vast, empty library, a single, worn company ledger open on his lap. The message was clear and visceral. This was not a business dispute. It was a family tragedy, and Christina was its author. His supporters amplified this narrative online, flooding comment sections with hashtags like justice for Alexander and loyalty matters, framing the conflict as a moral collapse rather than a corporate strategy. Their target was the gut, not the brain. In stark contrast, Christina's public relations machine operated with the cool precision of a corporate rebrand. Her strategy was to overwhelm the emotional narrative with a flood of data and forward momentum. She avoided intimate, confessional interviews, opting instead for staged business announcements and keynote speeches at major tech conferences. Her social media feeds transformed into a live dashboard of the new Sterling, filled with infographics on efficiency gains, videos of newly automated factory lines, and testimonials from the young executives she had promoted. When she did address the personal conflict, it was always through the lens of painful necessity. In one widely shared press conference, she stated, "My father built the house. My duty is to ensure it does not become a museum while the world builds skyscrapers around it." This framing was strategic and intellectual, designed to appeal to investors, employees, and a younger demographic that valued progress over sentiment. Her camp used targeted digital ads and influencer partnerships to spread this message of modernization, portraying her as a tough but essential leader making the hard choices others would not. The two narratives could not have been more different. One was a eulogy for a lost era, the other a prospectus for a bold new future. The public was presented with a choice. Do you side with the man who built the past or the woman who is building the future? And in that choice, the true victory was not just about who controlled the company, but who ultimately controlled the story. Years later, this boardroom battle has hardened into a permanent lesson in the halls of power. It is now a required case study at the world's leading business schools, dissected by professors and students alike. They do not study it as a simple story of betrayal, but as the ultimate corporate paradox. The case is formally titled Sterling Holdings, a study in legacy versus liquidity, forcing future executives to confront an agonizing question. When does the duty to preserve a founder's legacy require you to dismantle the very leadership that created it? In seminars from Harvard to Stanford, students are handed the financial reports, the board meeting minutes, and the legal filings, tasked with deciding for themselves who is truly right. The discussion always circles back to the core tension between family loyalty and fiduciary responsibility, between the emotional weight of the past and the cold, hard demands of the future. Beyond the classroom, the story has become a cultural shorthand. When a family-run company resists modernization, commentators immediately invoke the Sterling precedent. When a powerful founder clings to control for too long, board members whisper Christina's name as a warning. The saga is a constant reference point in debates about corporate governance and the perils of nepotism, demonstrating that placing an heir in power is no guarantee of harmony and can instead plant the seeds of revolution. For Alexander, history has been both kind and cruel. He is remembered with a certain reverence as a titan of industry, a brilliant builder from a bygone era. Yet, his ultimate legacy is inextricably tied to his fall. He is the cautionary tale of the founder who could not let go, whose very strength became his greatest weakness. His name is synonymous with a certain type of genius, but also with its inevitable expiration date. Christina, in turn, is immortalized as the architect of a painful but necessary transition. She is not celebrated as a heroine in the traditional sense, but respected as a decisive, if controversial, force of change. Her legacy is one of brutal pragmatism. She secured Sterling's place in the modern world, but the story of how she did it will forever be shadowed by the personal cost. The empire's name survived and even thrived, but its soul was forever altered. The tale of the heiress who fired her father endures not as a clear victory, but as a permanent, haunting question mark over the price of power and the true meaning of preserving a legacy. The Sterling saga serves as a stark lesson for any family business navigating the treacherous waters of legacy and control. At its core, this drama underscores the absolute necessity of a clear, written succession plan, a document that goes far beyond a simple will. It is a roadmap for the future, agreed upon when relationships are stable, not a weapon to be wielded in the heat of a power struggle. A robust plan outlines not just who will take the throne, but the precise timing and conditions of the transfer, the specific roles for other family members, and the mechanisms for a graceful exit for the founding generation. Without this, every discussion about the future becomes a personal, high-stakes battle, where business strategy is indistinguishable from a challenge to a parent's love or authority. Professional boundaries form the second critical pillar. The Sterling Empire crumbled precisely because the boardroom table and the dinner table were one and the same. When family dynamics dictate corporate decisions and business disputes poison family gatherings, neither institution can survive intact. Establishing clear roles is essential. When acting as the chief executive, a father must be able to receive a strategic proposal from his daughter, the vice president, without hearing the voice of a defiant child. This requires a conscious, almost theatrical, separation of hats, where professional disagreements are depersonalized and resolved through corporate channels, not family guilt trips. Finally, every family enterprise needs a pre-established, neutral mechanism for resolving leadership disputes. Relying on a sudden, all-or-nothing boardroom vote is like having no fire escape and trying to jump from the window. A healthy system might include a family council with independent advisors, a mandatory mediation clause in the corporate bylaws, or a designated independent board member who acts as an ombudsman. These structures provide a pressure valve, a way to address fundamental disagreements about company direction without forcing a choice between family loyalty and corporate survival. The Sterling story asks every family in business a haunting question. Have you built an institution that can outlive its founder? Or have you merely built a beautiful gilded cage that will trap the next generation in the same battles you fought? This battle between father and daughter was far from an isolated incident. Around the world, the conference rooms of family-run empires often become stages for Shakespearean levels of drama. Consider the saga of the Ambani brothers in India. After their father's death, the two siblings split the vast Reliance conglomerate in a feud so monumental it reshaped the entire nation's industrial landscape. Their conflict was a classic fraternal war, a battle between equals for their share of a kingdom. Then there is the ongoing Redstone family drama at Paramount, a vicious and public struggle for control of a media empire between a fading patriarch and his daughter, a fight filled with allegations of mental incompetence and bitter legal challenges. These stories share a common thread of ambition and inheritance, yet the Sterling conflict stands apart in a crucial way. It was not a fight between siblings after a patriarch's death, nor was it a battle against a parent perceived to be losing their grip. This was a direct, premeditated challenge from a fully groomed and capable heir to a founder still very much in command of his faculties. The unique tragedy here is that Christina was not fighting for a piece of the empire, nor was she fighting to save it from a parent's decline. She was fighting to save it from the parent's own vigorous, passionate, an utterly entrenched vision of its future. This was a clash of two capable, powerful leaders at the peak of their strategic understanding, one looking relentlessly forward, the other anchored unshakably in the past. That fundamental collision of two valid, yet utterly incompatible, truths is what makes this story so uniquely compelling and so deeply heartbreaking. It forces us to wonder where the line falls between honoring a creator and obeying them, and whether true loyalty sometimes requires the ultimate act of defiance. Christina Sterling's journey from a privileged heiress to a boardroom revolutionary is a modern parable of power and its profound costs. She was groomed for the throne she eventually seized, yet the inheritance came not as a gift, but as a prize she had to wrest from the hands of the king himself. This story echoes with timeless themes: the eternal conflict between the generation that builds an empire and the one tasked with steering it into an uncertain future. It forces us to confront the brutal choice between unwavering loyalty to family and the heavy responsibility of safeguarding a legacy larger than any single person. The crown she won secured the future of an empire, but it shattered the family that name was meant to represent. So we are left with one final, haunting question. When the dust of the corporate battle settles and the financial reports are filed away, was the ultimate victory worth the personal kingdom she lost?